Pleasure. Yeah, absolutely. No, Lee, thanks so much for having me. So background is pretty straightforward, and I've been on some of the shows. So some people, some repeat listeners may have heard me or heard this story before, but I'll try to add some new information to it. My background primarily, before Kroll was on the FBI. And by the way, Lee, some people are texting me and saying you might be muted still, so they might not be able to hear you on the live stream. I'll let you monitor the chat. So So, my background, when I was going through my college career, I actually started out my young life, if you will, from web design and an IT business in South later. That's where I was basically grew up. And so I had an IT company kind of during the dot com boom, which was a perfect time. Certainly blessed there where, it was just the right time, right place. But I started out with web design and IT. And, as a true kind of investigator, if you will, wanted to know how things work. And I know that's a lot of people, it's almost cliched at this point in forensics, 20, 30 years into forensics. But most people, I think, started out very similar, right? They wanted to figure out how things worked. They wanted to figure out how to tinker with them. And I loved the fact that, at least from my story personally, I was able to start out figuring out how to build computers, starting with, the actual raw parts. And that's what I started on. I started out doing that for another company first, and building systems back before, Dell and all the other brands could potentially build them for, a couple $100. We could actually make money on building them, white box solutions, as I call them. But I got in really good with the local economy. I was able to build systems for, servers for companies. I was able to do their networking. Of course, once my foot was in the door, now I'm building their websites. And so I was able to pay my way entirely through college. But I had a hunger for information technology at the time, not so much focused on forensics, but I wanted to know how things worked. And I often, to the much the chagrin of my parents going through high school and college, all my technical assignments, I would usually be late for them because I would be trying to figure out why things didn't work. And I'd be figuring out how to do things that, maybe the instructor or the assignment didn't call for, but I had a hunger to figure out how to do it better and beyond. And so that was a little bit of my own OCD curiosity on things, but it ultimately led, and I had an opportunity in college where, when I was going for my undergraduate degree in digital forensic science, I was focused on, originally trying to, focus on web design. And I realized, after troubleshooting ASP and PHP and all the other wonderful .NET codes back then, that is not what I wanted to do my entire
Right.
life. And certainly for those of you that are programmers by trade, love that you have that spirit and that gumption. It was not for me. But I ended up, shifting my focus as I moved into finishing my bachelor's in the digital forensic science, and it was brand new at the time, Champlain College. And what was very neat is, during my last year, I was able to had an opportunity to do the honors internship through the FBI, and I never thought of a career in law enforcement really before that opportunity. In fact, even going into that internship, I was thinking I would just be what the Bureau refers to as an information technology specialist, an ITS FE,
But
forensic
see, they take
examiner.
the smart
That's what
guys.
I
They
want.
take the smart guys, right?
Absolutely, and I'm in good company. So so we ended up, I was able to get into that internship. It was offered. I mean, there was, at the time, there was tens of thousands that put in for the internships across the country. And out of the honors internship program, there was about 890, I think, in the year that I went in. And there was only 11 of us that were selected for the New Jersey Regional Computer, excuse me, for the Regional Computer Forensics Laboratories, the RCFL program. So out of 900 honors interns, only 10 or 11 of us got the very coveted RCFL positions. It was an arduous process. It involved, obviously, the whole background investigation. For those of you that have ever done the SF-86, that basically spells out your entire life. When you're a young 20 something, you don't have much of a life. So that SF-86 is much easier than when you're in your 40s or older trying to do that. But for me, I was able to get my foot in the door, got my clearance, and I spent an entire summer at the New Jersey Regional Computer Forensics Laboratory in Hamilton, New Jersey. It was absolutely a phenomenal experience. Got to work next to agents, got to work next to law enforcement, and that started the proverbial hunger for doing that full time. And I was able to, with an agreement with the New Jersey or Newark division of the FBI and the Atlanta division of the FBI, to rotate back, maintain my clearance, and volunteer an unpaid internship in Atlanta. And I had just about reached my 24th birthday and was able to put my application in to become an agent. And of course, that was a little bit different than what I had expected for my life to go, but it also meant I had to get much more in shape than I was at that point in my life from a physical fitness standard. And it was at a very defining moment. Was able to get through the academy, was able to get into an entire career that followed. Now, I'll say one other thing that probably many people don't know about me. This is actually a very personal note. I was 10 weeks in to the FBI Academy, and my mother had a heart
Oh,
attack. And
wow.
my mother actually passed away 3 days
Oh,
after that heart
sorry
attack.
to hear that.
So I was at the academy in the Northeast, six, 7 states away from my parents, and lost my mom during that. So I actually rotated out. The bureau was extremely supportive at the time. I was a nobody. I was a new agent trainee, right? I certainly was not an agent, and was halfway through my training, but was very supportive. Was able to go home, spend time with family, and go back. I had to rotate into another class, so I lost my classmates, but I was able to go through that process, and it defined me very much so. Right.
Mm.
Was able. It was an extremely pivotal moment in life, but I had a goal in mind to get somewhere, and I thankfully blessed to have achieved that goal. Graduated new agents training and was able to move to a very coveted office. I got to the Charlotte division of the FBI, and specifically the Raleigh resident agency. And at the time that I got there, it was probably only 20, 30 bodies. And by the time I left my bureau career, almost 7+ years later, even with the internship time, I think overall I was in the bureau about 10 years with the internship from start to finish. At the very end, we were over 100 people in that resident agency. It grew significantly while I was there, but absolutely great time. So during my time as an agent, I was able to get into the cyber program with the FBI, focused very much on cyber crimes. And we actually, myself and another agent, started the cyber squad in Raleigh. Before we got there was no cyber squad, or it was a party of one or two. And so we were able to really build that cyber squad. And we actually had a blended squad for a while. We were both counterintelligence and cyber. And so we were able to do that for many years. And I was able to then get into the CART program, the computer analysis and response team, which was that was my pride and joy. It was the culmination of what I had been very hard at work for many years to try to achieve that. And so about halfway through my career, I finally got all the way into that program and was able to spend basically the rest of my career with the Bureau focused on forensics, focused on cyber-based investigations. And then my capstone, which I was a significant pride for me, was getting all the way to become a supervisor. So I actually rotated up to headquarters, operational technology division, and was the CART field operations supervisor over the CART program for all 50 plus divisions, all 50 states, but all 56 plus divisions of the FBI, and worked with our legats and attaché offices overseas for many years. It was a phenomenal amount of time, it was a phenomenal amount of projects, both being read into programs that you never would have gotten to do anywhere else, and being able to do some amazing forensics and cyber-based
Mm.
investigations that honestly the FBI is bar none.
Right.
So bar none as far as the best. So that's me in a nutshell as far as how I got into it.
Right. And so I guess, going back into, building, tinkering. This is, what, I don't necessarily like this off the shelf, so I'm going to go in and I'm going to put this together. Do you think being tinkering and going through some of that, um, uh, I didn't say, I mean, pushed you into what you're doing now, but, is it something that you look back on and say, wow, I'm glad I did that?
Yes. Yeah, no, absolutely. That's a good question. So one of the things that I think, as in digital forensics, we are investigators, right? And digital forensics means a lot of things to a lot of people, but I think at its core definition, it is a science. And people need to remember it is a science. Some people look at it as a hobby, some people look at it as an IT or an advanced IT field, but what we do is we are forensic scientists. We are pursuing something and we are applying technical and a particular discipline of knowledge very specific to our field, but it's a science, which means you test theories, you prove theories, you document. And one of the things I loved about my background in IT, and I encourage both those that I've trained over the years, the new agents that came behind me, but also the people here at what I do now at Kroll, I have encouraged people, you need to understand how things work. If you're going to investigate something, you want to be able to articulate and explain to it with specificity or with accuracy. You need to understand it from a fundamental level. Do you need to be able to program and do everything? If you have the skill set, absolutely it helps. But being able to speak to something but truly understand it, I think sometimes is lost, right? So people want to get into digital forensics and they want to read books, they want to be able to speak to the science what we do without understanding the backbone of the
Yeah,
science
so
we do.
so
And so I think
so I'm going to hit you on that. I'm going to hit you on that, and I
sure.
want you to explain to me. And I mean, it's another kind of rhetorical question. I know what the answer is. I think um, is obviously utilizing the same things you with the scientific method. And I talked about this and making sure that you go through that, everything's provable, that you can continue to go through that process. But I mean, be honest. What do you think's the percentage of investigators that are doing digital forensics, whether it be in the law enforcement side or in the corporate side of it, or whatever you're doing, are actually utilizing those principles?
Ooh, that's a loaded question.
Right. That's why I asked
I
you.
would say I would say those that have a investigative background, traditionally that's going to be law enforcement. It can absolutely be private sector, but traditionally law enforcement, whether it's city, state, local, federal, you are trained to think through and piece together clues.
Mhm.
You are also think to look at things from a big picture perspective. And the same application applies to forensics. If something's not working, if something is not found, the absence of a forensic artifact is just as important as the tool that says here's the magic, here's the
Yeah.
find any evidence
Yeah.
button, right? So I think the having the investigative background helps fully round a forensic investigator. And I'll give you this example. Early on in my career, building computers, way before I went down the law enforcement track, way before I got into digital forensics, building computers allows you to troubleshoot things, right?
Yeah.
It's the basics, and at the time, we're certainly dating myself here, but going back all the way to floppy drives, CD drives, and all the different Molex plugs and everything else that went between. When you built something and you push the power button, it doesn't work. Now you have to troubleshoot. Now you have to start unplugging things. You reverse. You go one step at a time. What's the last thing I plugged in? Unplug it. How many times, and for those who build computers, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. How many times with ATX motherboards did you potentially plug in particular the pins, but you reversed them by accident because the little writing was so small? And that caused the system not to boot. Something so simple, but it's a troubleshooting. It's learning a methodology of how to troubleshoot something you've done and work
So,
backwards to find the
could you
root
imagine
cause.
how many people that would have to flip master slave right now if you had people actually do that right now? I'm just thinking outside because right now people are like just like whatever. I'm gonna call someone else. I just what, this doesn't
Right
work.
now,
This doesn't work. Just throw this out.
it's all SATA plugs, right? So, or even something brand new from USB-C, et cetera. You're right. It's plugged in, it's
Yeah.
go, right? We've taken a lot of that manual troubleshooting out from what it used to be. But to wrap that up in a bow, I mean, that's digital
Yeah.
forensics. Why is my tool not finding me the thing? Or how come I don't see this in the logs? Or even with modern incident response, my bad guy cleared the logs. My tool's not going to find it. Now it's time to begin piecing together what should be here and making inferences from the available forensic evidence. That's just it's troubleshooting. It's investigative
Yeah, so
methodology.
what do you see as an investigator, or what can you give to someone as an investigator, that let's just talk about a green someone who really wants to get into doing digital forensics or incident response type of stuff. I mean, what advice can you give to them?
Law enforcement. I think one of the things, and look, there's a lot of opinions out there about law enforcement. I'm extremely pro law enforcement. And so this world we live in right now has a lot of politics. We'll leave the politics to the side for this. But law enforcement and the tools of the trade, the training that goes into it, the ability to think through problems, to think through an investigation, I think that's one of the best things, in my personal opinion, and with my background, it's one of the best things that's going to train people for digital
Mhm.
forensics because you are learning to think through an investigation before you start getting into the science or the technical of what you do. And the two go together. You can't have one without the other. You can't say I do digital forensics and not understand it's an investigation at the end of the
No, I
day.
really like that. I mean, things as you're saying that, like I said, because I make things up and my brain moves slow on some of things, but right. So, but as I'm thinking that, I'm thinking like, scenario based type of stuff. People are getting into it if they're in, and not necessarily a computer scenario or computer forensic stuff. Hey, here's this floppy drive and here's this thumb drive. What do you do when you find it? But more or less, I mean, a standard investigation. I mean, would you say like a scene? Here's a burglary scene or whatever. How can you go and take the pieces of that, something that's not necessarily as technical, and kind of lead people in and build some foundation of investigative work? I mean, would that? I mean, do you think that would be good for someone that's getting into it?
I think so. And that's, even if the law enforcement isn't for some people, but they still want to get into forensics, the other thing to think about is actually going through, and we've got a whole page in about DFIR for this, but all of the
Hey, I haven't got
actual
to that yet.
hey, sorry.
I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
All of the actual other people have put very good scenarios together, right? They've modeled images, they've come up with scenarios, actually absolutely capture the flag type methodology, working through a real scenario. I think at the end of the day, that's all great hands-on learning, just like a college degree, whether you're going for a graduate level degree. And I have my master's in digital forensic science. I know some that have gone for their PhDs. Absolutely. The education helps to the bona fides. There are certainly SANs and others that are extremely good in well-rounding and transfer of knowledge. The hands-on, for me, is the absolute best
Mm-hmm.
teacher. No book is ever going to teach me as much as the hands-on doing, because that's how my brain
Right.
works. Some people may be fine learning from a book. Some people may get that. I learn from the
Yeah.
hands-on.
Yeah. I think that's, again, that's extremely important, right? But still, I think building a foundation before really saying, hey, do this. But honestly, I mean, you can give someone a scenario, some digital forensics or some IR that there isn't A, B, C, D, E, right? I mean, that's something that people should understand is
Yeah,
that your methodology, right, needs to be sound, but say the way that you're getting to the end or to that result or part of that investigation, it can be different, right?
absolutely. No, absolutely. And look, at the end of the day, that's one of the funny things. I'll go off on a tangent here for a second. I look at
Do it all the
people
time.
who approach digital people that look at digital forensics and they say, hey, I should be able to build a workflow and I should be able to repeat that workflow every time.
Yeah.
I think on some things you can have a basic workflow, but if you start getting so nitty gritty that you've defined every single juncture or pivot point within a workflow for digital forensics, now you've lost the art of the investigation, because that workflow is going to break as soon as someone moves the logs to a different location,
Right. Right.
or as soon as the bad guy clears something. What do you do? So being able to think outside the box, but also, again, going back to what I said earlier, understanding this should be here. I don't have it, so
Mm-hmm.
why? And having enough knowledge and hands-on experience to say, from a standpoint of A to Z and the parts in between, I can tell this story and I can understand why these pieces are
Mm-hmm.
missing.
So I know that you believe education and training are pretty important, as do I. So, I know that, the information that you have, and I actually talked about it last week, in with your blog. So let's talk a little bit about that. I mean, really, how does it start? Why is it important for people? Why is it important for you? I mean, what are, just, I mean, talk all about everything that people can get out of that and what you get out of producing the content.
So about DFIR has been a cradle to far from grave, but a cradle to extreme maturation project. And it was back in my FBI days, I had actually a spreadsheet of links that I curated, and as many of your listeners, I'm sure, have done themselves, right? You curate things that mean something to you, that have worked for a particular project, and you start to collect that. I mean, our brains are amazing, but trying to remember particular websites from memory is, I don't think, something anyone does. We all
Right.
have our favorite lists. So it started as a list. And within the CART program, we ended up sharing a lot of those links internally. And originally, our spreadsheet went up on an internal site, and we shared that. When I left, I obviously took the law enforcement stuff out of it, and then I started building upon it. And originally, it was shared, internally with those I worked with. And finally, I said, you know what? I want to give some breath or life to this project and actually create a website around it. And there's only so many hours in a day. and I've got 4 kids and a wife and a job. So it started out as a project that I would do late at night and a project I did on the weekends when the kids were sleeping. And with a very tolerant wife, finally pushed through in about a month designing that website and bringing it to what it is. And I have recruited some amazing talent. I would be sorely remiss if I didn't call all those that have contributed to the project. Absolutely, because frankly, my day to day now is as a managing director with Kroll. But the website itself and all the data on there, look, there's some great websites on the internet that have done very similar to what we have done. I think some of them have even gotten some very good content from us. But ultimately, we have the sites are there for the community, and that's what matters. If that helps with just one person being able to advance their career or find something or put two and two together or have the that's it moment, that's what it's
Mhm.
for. I don't have advertisements on the website. I make no money from it. It's all out of pocket. I pay the hosting costs, I pay the domain costs, I pay the security costs. We are volunteers to do that project, and I hope it matters for the community.
Yeah.
That's the purpose of
So
it.
so that brings up something that's I think, well, I'm not going to say what I think, is so giving back, right? That's really really important. But so you've really seen kind of the law enforcement into the private side of it, and obviously the private side of it comes with say working or say defense experts and those types that are not necessarily working, or they could have come from law enforcement, but obviously, and say we'll talk about criminal cases. I mean, what are your feelings about information sharing in the entire community? It really doesn't matter necessarily what you do, but continuing on to educate the masses.
There's a couple of ways I can answer that. Let me take a stab at it this way. Law enforcement has an incredibly important mission, specifically in a couple of areas. One, the protection of life and limb. Two, national security. And three, the protection of property and U.S. assets. The first, life and limb, I think is one of the most important, but it's certainly not siloed from the other two. Within the criminal mission of both local and state law enforcement as well as federal law enforcement, you are, and I'll take an easy one here, crimes against children, or CAC. It's an extremely important mission to protect innocence, which is exactly what law enforcement is charged to do. There are many techniques that law enforcement uses that should be considered law enforcement sensitive because they allow us to catch bad guys. Within the digital forensics community, as many scientific communities, there is an approach to share openly information. The more you share, the more it is open, which means equally parties who don't want to have the information to use it against you or to now potentially hide from you have it. I don't have a perfect answer for you, but I know that anytime information is shared of how law enforcement does something, and look, in our criminal system, we have subpoenas, we have search warrants. Things are documented, even if under seal, they are documented and openly within our court of the way our legal system works. You eventually go before a judge and you have a prosecutor and a defense attorney, and all of the nitty gritty facts of how you did an investigation are out in plain court public opinion.
Right. And
We lose law enforcement techniques for
yeah,
things
and
over time.
I 100% agree with you on especially methodology, right? And what I'm talking about methodology
Yes.
is, things that obviously aren't necessarily I'm looking at the zeros and the ones and this is what I'm doing, right? It's how I'm getting these kind of these zeros and ones, or what you're necessarily doing, which obviously that in I 100% agree with that. But also on the other hand, right, is the examination and the tools and the training and the availability of the community. I mean, is it and should companies silo their information or their training from people that say do defense work?
If the tools and techniques and training have to do with things that are sensitive to national security or criminal work, I would say potentially yes.
Mm-hmm.
But every scenario is
Right.
unique to an extent,
Right.
right? If we're talking about how does Windows work to the extent of an artifact, no. But if we're talking about something proprietary that allows us to understand intellectual property or understand how to catch someone, or potentially, if revealed, will jeopardize national security or jeopardize ongoing investigations,
Yeah.
yes. I think it should be
Yeah. You
protected.
know, I mean, this has been it's crazy. You know, obviously, being in law enforcement as long as I was and going into that as well, it's one of those things that it's like I don't want to say till the start of time, but kind of the start of time, right? If you talk about it, right, in taking that information, right, and making sure that. But to me, personally, to me is that one, if you take the time in your investigation and you do this and you continue and you work at your craft at that, it really doesn't necessarily matter, right? Is that you're doing things and you're doing things for good, and trying to come up with this, obtaining some training, because I know if you look at it, and then people that are, say, doing, I don't want to say criminal, but say, in some civil suit or whatever, that they're doing the investigation. And as part of that, it really comes down to, you know, are they using their powers for good? And, it comes
Yeah.
down to an individual side of it. But, for me, allowing something or someone and giving them, say, the tools and giving them the background, the foundation, for me would be a benefit to the person that they're representing, right? Doesn't matter what you're, so as part of that, what can you tell people, that as part of a training, or I know we have the blogs and we know have all these different types of things, but where should someone start? Where should someone start to get that foundation? Because I'm big on, what, here's the tool, but you know what, you better have all this stuff down here. So what does all that stuff down here look like?
And so digital, that's a great question, but it's also a broad question. So, everything in digital forensics has where you want to go with a focus, right? Do you want to do reverse engineering, which I think arguably is an aspect of digital forensics? Do you want to do instant response where you're just threat hunting? You're going to use digital forensics for that, right? Or an aspect of that. Or are you going to be doing cell phone forensics?
Mm-hmm.
Absolutely a specialty, but also very specific to the ecosystems of phones and the operating systems running on them, as well as the databases and the encryptions, et cetera. Or do you want to do something else? So broadly, I think it comes down to what is it you want to do, and whatever that foundational is, actually going hands-on and testing. I think learning at the most fundamental is learning how it works before you dive into playing with tools. So one of the biggest things I've always been an advocate of is before you go spend and buy the shiny tool, know what it is that you're actually breaking down and do it yourself manually, which is one thing that I think education is great for, at least from my experience. Most of the educational programs out there, and we have a whole list of them on the website for undergraduate degrees all the way through graduate degrees, most of them that we have vetted and had the opportunity for people to submit, they're usually giving you the building blocks and the foundational knowledge before you go pull out the shiny tool that does the whiz bang job for you. Look, we use tools because they help us automate things. Do I think that we should be taking time to manually parse apart a PST every single time to stitch emails together and headers? No, that's why we have tools to automate and to make us more efficient. But if you can't explain why a chunk of messages in a PST is in a different location, or why they're marked as read or not, then you're relying too much on the tool to do the work for you. Have a fundamental understanding of why does this do what it does. And so I think that goes back to your fundamental question, which is if you're going to get into this science we call digital forensics, whatever you're going to specialize in, spend time doing the hard work first, and the tool should come second to validate your work after the fact until you are comfortable enough to be able to explain what it is you're doing and not rely upon the tool. If you ever catch yourself saying, well, the tool told me this,
Right.
then you need to
Right.
reevaluate, in my
Yeah, I
opinion.
think that's extremely important for people to understand, is that it's great. I mean, no one, well, I don't want to say no one. Say tools are great, right? I mean, you have to utilize those, whether it be time saving, whether no
Yes.
time saving, or going through that data, but really understanding a tool's a tool, but understanding that if a tool pulls the data out, I should know, right? If it's a
Correct.
smoking gun or whatever, I should really understand how it's kind of working. So as long as people get that type of stuff, I won't get on my soapbox a whole, what, mobile devices and started with tool. People starts with tools and they don't understand anything else on that. I mean, that's kind of how it's not, a lot of times it still is. But so let's move on. to and really talk about, I mean, can you share with anyone, obviously not utilize any specifics or any type of names, I mean, a case that really kind of sticks out, and it really doesn't matter when, whether it be in the law enforcement side of it or whether it be in some IR stuff and whatever you're doing, but something, and I mean, just kind of take it through the process and really kind of some artifacts that you went, oh my gosh, gold type of stuff. I mean, just walk people through that, give them a little idea, take them on a journey.
All right. I'm gonna try to give you one from both and keep me honest on the time here.
No,
So I'll give you a law
hey,
enforcement
we could
story.
be all day, but I have to get another beer if we're going to be done.
So I had a phenomenal career, very worthwhile career within law enforcement. And so there's a lot of stories to tell. But I had a very interesting one once where it's a good counterintelligence, and I'll keep it at the unclass level. It was a very good story from a perspective of a nation state threat actor, but they were using very off the shelf tools to intrude upon a network and a victim. And so we were running the criminal investigation, and we're working with other three letters to do the national security side. And I was able to get hands-on devices, and this is definitely before the days of being able to roll out sensors to systems and collect all sorts of telemetry. So it was very much dead box approach. And so we had our forensic images, we had our servers, we had our desktops, and this is one of those, go back earlier in our conversation. This is the take the step back and understand how all the pieces fit together, right? This isn't just one computer, very linear. This is looking at over 60, 70 computers and trying to understand what did a bad guy do in a network. And this was way before I had ever done incident response at the scale that I do now at Kroll. This was, most of what I did in law enforcement was the bad guys got the bad guy stuff on the one computer. Find it, to push it for the AUSA, and you're done. This was actually looking at an intrusion. And for many of your viewers, many of your listeners, intrusions is what they do every day. It's what I do every day now, but then it was brand new for me. And so trying to actually process 50, 60 systems plus servers to include operating systems I had never really dealt with, as well as the inner workings of those. Active Directory, I wasn't an administrator by background, but diving in, calling upon people that had that skill set, and then actually trying to replicate this stuff, building actually my own. I had actually, for that case, I built a small domain. I networked about 10 nodes into that domain, joined them in with different versions, and I started doing what I thought had happened and using the same tools. So I tested in my playground to figure out how those tools reacted in the environment, to include particular piece of malware that was very unique. We'll leave it at that. It was very unique to that victim and had not been observed by the Federal Bureau of Investigation more broadly. So it was a very fine-tuned piece of code. I had a separate team working on the reverse engineering, but I focused on the forensics artifacts. I focused on, if the bad guy came in this way and dropped this tool, how does it change the ecosystem of the operating system? And so I got to test all of that in a very controlled system. And I got to document so much out of that. That was a phenomenal case from start to finish. It lasted almost 3 years.
Wow.
So 3 years worth of that. And there was so much more than, I don't want anyone to think that it took me 3 years to get through 50, 60 computers. It was the bigger overarching case, right? And honestly, that case is probably still going. But it was with a very particular victim organization, thought they had a theft of intellectual property. And we got to recreate a year's worth of an intrusion. So 12 months worth of an intrusion before it had actually been detected, before something anomalous had popped up that keyed them in. We worked backwards and had a 12 to 13 or so month intrusion into this network. But we were able to document so much for the intelligence community as well as for law enforcement. So we were able to basically write some incredible information and documentation for that particular threat actor group that hadn't been done before. And look, I know many of your listeners have very similar, probably very stories, especially those that do government work. But back then, we're talking 10 plus years ago, it was a phenomenal opportunity. So it was a great thing on the law enforcement side. On the private sector side, and doing more on the instant response now, I get to use a lot more interesting tools. And so, be able to use tools, push things out from a telemetry perspective, or an EDR, XDR, whatever buzzword you want to use, pulling a tool out that allows you to see enterprises in the 50, 60, 70,000 endpoint range, and actually have a SOC that allows you to make that data manageable, right? No single person can look at 50, 60,000 computers.
Okay,
No,
I'm going to
you
stop
can't.
you real quick.
And so
Don't forget. Okay, explain to people what a sock is, because it's not what you put in your drawer. So let people know.
It is most certainly not what you put on your feet or put in your drawer and or your hamper eats and disappears
Right.
pairs. So a security operations
Got it.
center, something that actually has people dedicated to review of logs, review of the ingestion of data, or what I refer to as telemetry.
Yes.
Telemetry data. So the traditional EDR, endpoint detection and response, or XDR, extended detection and response, or whatever you might want to use it X for, is something that allows you to actually collect data, bring it in from multiple vantage points and origin points, and start to blend it together. What do we do in forensics? We timeline things. We tell a story over the course of beginning to end, cradle to grave, of something that happened. Sometimes it's a short story. Bad guy got into an email account. He was there for 15 minutes. He did X, Y, Z searches. It's an easy timeline. When you start getting an instant response at scale for enterprise-based networks, especially when you're talking about geographical distances, time zone changes, an actual corporate entity that is across a global entity perhaps that has offices in 20 plus countries, 50, 60,000 endpoints, you need an enterprise tool. You're not, in my opinion, you're not going on site and you're not looking at particular systems one at a time. You need to get scale. So some of the best stories I have from what I do now at Kroll as a managing director and head of incident response is actually looking at, for large enterprises, data at scale and working with my teams to understand an intrusion lifecycle, whether it's coming through a VPN because of an exploit or because of the famous, and well tried and true, send someone an email and hope they open the document to infect themselves. Whatever it is, that is a passion now. And so one particular story that was a very fun one was we had a client come to us and say, we have actually got a very suspicious activity on one computer, and it's someone in finance. And we think we've basically already done the investigation. We already have a theory what happened. We know when they clicked on this thing, and we already have the bad email. We basically just want you to come in and validate us. Absolutely, here to support. We get in. Remember, the client said it's one computer. We already have done the investigation. This is the only place you need to look. So we support the client and we get in and we're looking at this and we realize there's malware, but there's also evidence of logins to the computer. This is one piece of a much bigger puzzle, right? And so the analogy I often use when I'm explaining this to clients is your network is a large puzzle board. I'm coming in and all your puzzle pieces are upside down. I don't know what the big picture is yet. You've got to give me time, you've got to give me context, and you've got to give me evidence. And I need time to work through that evidence with my team to understand the big picture and begin flipping over the puzzle pieces. And as I start building that, I'm going to be missing puzzle pieces. I'm going to come back to, I'm going to ask for more. I'm going to realize that even though I asked for the deployment of the sensor across 10,000 endpoints, and we believe we have network saturation, we're going to find a computer that doesn't have a sensor on it, that we left in a closet or we left in a server and we didn't realize it. And so I had this particular case. Client thought it was one system, and I was able to realize that this one computer was actually the hub for a piece of malware, but the threat actor had been coming and going from this piece of system for 3 months.
Mm-hmm.
And so we were able to push the time clock back, realized it wasn't just the fact that it was finance, it just happened to be a system of interest. And the account being used was a domain administrator account.
Mm-hmm.
Many of your listeners are going to know where this is going. We basically presented our preliminary findings, and the client took our recommendation to deploy our sensor, and their network started lighting up like a Christmas tree. We ended up on a global client with over 10,000 endpoints. We had malware on close to 900 systems.
Yeah.
Remember, we started with
Right.
one. We had 900 systems, so about a tenth of the client's global network had some form of malware for this particular intrusion. Actually pushed the intrusion back 3 years.
Mm.
Phenomenal case. And the amazing thing is the fact that we even had logs that could push us back in some instances to be able to go back 3 years. Look, logs were long gone on most systems. Windows event logs, security, terminal services, operational logs of application, they're
So,
gone. They've rolled off at this point, right?
so not to
Go
be
ahead.
not to be nosy, but I mean, was it
Of
so
course.
was this propagating? Was it what would just malware actually the source, and that was sending it out only throughout the network to each of one? So it was kind of the source. It planted there and just boom, was sending it out to everybody else, and continue doing that.
The one system of interest, the reason it drew the client's attention because they're running very slow.
Ah,
And upon their antivirus sweep, and I love antivirus. Look, we all need antivirus. It serves a very critical purpose. But in this modern era of malware, antivirus is only really going to be successful, in my humble opinion, 30 to 40% of the time.
yeah.
As soon as you introduce polymorphism or you introduce something that is very fine-tuned, antivirus is very binary in its approach. And look, I'm sure many antivirus vendors might argue with me on that and give me the sales pitch of how their product is fantastic and will collect all the things. Name the antivirus product, and we most likely have seen it evaded
Oh yeah.
or neutered
Yeah.
by
Yeah.
malware. And so ultimately, the client had identified the system was running slow, and they had identified something that was suspicious in the system, but their antivirus could not clean it. That was the best
Mm-hmm.
part. Even with a reboot, it was like it was a locked file.
Right.
And so the system of interest was a particular command and control hub point.
Mm-hmm.
And so the malware being used allowed the threat actor to come and go from the system. But look, I've got 900 plus systems in the network that have very similar malware. There ended up being over 40 different hub points coming and going. So the network traffic saturation was actually getting to the point of significance. And when we started sharing our findings with the client, it was, this is a really big deal. Now, look, at that point, we had affected actor ejection, we had affected containment. And so we no longer had traffic leaving. We no longer had the ingress egress traffic coming in and out of the network that was causing risk. But now we've got 3 years worth of damage control. And so our particular client was doing development of particular products. And the development of particular products meant they were involved in a supply chain. Well, the supply chain, we realized, was their intellectual property and development of particular
Right.
widgets for 3+ years. It also meant that there was particular malware that had been embedded in the supply chain process for those 3 years. And so it ended up turning into an amazing investigation. The client was phenomenal to work with, but ultimately that was one of my favorite cases since I've been here at Kroll for coming up on 5 years now. One of my favorite cases because there was so much in that case that went right to allow us to tell a phenomenal story, right? There was just the right blend of log retention, system artifacts, and an overall information for us to tell a phenomenal story and really root out where the threat actor had been, what he had viewed access required, and ultimately also what he had exfiltrated and
So
compromised.
this is my question, and I have one more after this. And it's because of you. You brought me into asking more questions. So I mean, I actually have seen it because I talk about DFIR and all that other stuff, right? So it really is separation of the digital forensics, obviously instant response. So is it the chicken or the egg, right? Is typically does responding to an incident lead to the digital forensic side of it, where now you're going to have to dive into either you know the logs, the any event logs, everything that's on that say that particular endpoint that you believe is the one or the command and control center. Does incident response lead to that? Because the question was, why is it not IRDF? Right? So explain to me. I mean, or what's your explanation? I mean, does each incident response event lead to some sort of digital forensics?
I love the question. I think incident response is a part of digital forensics. I think digital forensics is the overarching umbrella. Digital forensics, going back to what I said in the very beginning, it is the science of what we do. It is the investigative drive to be able to defensively prove what you're finding or to be able to articulate it forensically what has happened. Incident response is an aspect of that, just as much as malware and reverse engineering is an aspect of digital forensics. It's still an investigative science. And so incident response, I think, is what people sometimes use as the umbrella term, but it really is digital forensics. I'm responding to an incident. Let's be very clear. The client has my clients, my victims, whoever they may be, there's an incident that has occurred and we are responders,
Mm-hmm.
right?
Mm-hmm.
But what is it we're doing?
Yeah.
Digital
Right.
forensics. So I think some people sometimes blur the
Yeah.
terms. I think it's crystal clear, and that's the defining line.
Yeah.
I am a digital forensics practitioner. I am a certified examiner. I am someone that is an investigator by trade, and I'm responding to your incidents. So yes, digital forensics and instant response, dfir, fantastic term, and I do think it sometimes blurs the lines of what we do. But we are incident responders responding to an incident, specifically implementing digital forensic science in the way we
I
respond to that
love
incident.
it. I couldn't answer it better myself. So now, on to the big question, because people I wait till the end to ask this, right? And so
Oh,
no, we kind of already talked about artifact and things like that, but I mean, we talked about your favorite things and the things that you look at. What's something that, I mean, and of course, I know just like you that every investigation is different. That's why we do it. It's like working on patrol or doing some other things every day is, I mean, it's different. You don't know what's going to happen. It can go all over the place, right? But what is something that you can tell people to do? I mean, at the start of their investigation or a part of that investigation, and we'll just take it to computers, right? What is something that they can do that's going to benefit them really I mean, if we take 90% or whatever percentage you want to put on it, that you should be doing as an investigator when you're looking at and some sort of computer artifact?
Okay, I got one for you. Logs. That's a very broad term. It means a lot of different things to a lot of different people. I'm going to be very specific. I have seen time and time again examiners, especially newer examiners, newer to our field, newer to our practice, our discipline, run the tool that parses the image and pulls out all the stuff. I love looking. Let's just talk with Windows. Let's make this easy. Mac, Linux, every operating system has its nuances, but let's just, and certainly phones, but let's just talk Windows for to easy. How often do you think examiners just go look at the installed program list? Just go to program files, go look and see what's actually installed in the system. If your tool your tool is programmed by a person. You or I have made a tool. You know this is better than I do. Especially, I think you might be affiliated with a very good tool. The tool is only as good as the programmer behind it. Well, if your tool programmer and parser has never actually seen a particular log or artifact, your tool's going to miss it. There's nothing that beats eyes on your evidence. Go hunt. Go look for third-party tools. And so here's an interesting story for you. I had an examination. My examiner was reporting back to me and giving me the resuscitation of the timeline, and there was a gap in my timeline. We had an intrusion, very straightforward ransomware matter. We had an intrusion that lasted about a week, from intrusion to reconnaissance to account escalation to credential harvesting, all the way to data staging and exfil, and then to ransomware. Perfect life cycle. But he's missing about a 16-hour period. And I'm noticing in the timeline, he's logged in. And so I asked my examiner, why do I have a blank spot in the timeline? It's like, well, I didn't find anything. He's logged in. We haven't identified any log clearing or anti-forensics. What's he doing? He or she. We both went eyes on the evidence together. And I took a different approach. Let's just go look at programs. Let's just forget the tool. Close the tool for a second. Bring up X-Waves, bring up FTK Imager, give me a tool that's going to show me the file system, and let's go hunt. Lo and behold, we find two tools installed, interestingly enough. Actually, one was installed, one had been downloaded and run from a portable location. We go and find these two tools, and there's logs. There's logs associated locally with the tool. None of the forensic tools had parsed them out or pulled them out. It's eyes on the evidence. So the first one was a file transfer program. Now, it was interesting because I was like, well, surely this is a well-known enough file transfer tool that it would have been parsed by the forensic tools we're using. It wasn't. For whatever reason, whether it was in the encoding or the obfuscation, it was not parsed. So my examiner never saw it. And so we're eyes on looking through it, and we're like, here's a log. Played with it. I love CyberChef. For those of you that have ever used it, it's a phenomenal tool. And we played with it. It took us about a half hour, if I remember correctly. We finally figured out what the obfuscation was. It wasn't encryption, it was just obfuscation. And we now have an entire log. Dates, times, IP addresses, and the actual iteration of files being copied out. Yeah. Well, guess what? That was about 10 hours worth of activity. So I had a 16-hour window. Well, now I know what he's been doing for 10 hours. He basically fired up a replication service and started exfilling data. All right, so now we've got that. So what was the second tool? The second tool was actually a portable file that reconned the environment and dumped IP addresses for systems, and then pushed a particular tool to those systems and pulled credentials from the web browsers. We almost missed the entire tool and the staging information because our forensic tools and the automation we were relying upon didn't find it. That's what it would be my takeaway for your listeners as your final question, and certainly available for more questions. But that's the biggest thing.
Yeah, no.
Never forget that whatever.
Yeah, I think that's super, super important that people, that really no one understands, right? Is that you have an EXE or you have something that you're looking to see that okay, they launched this program, which is great, right? You can look at that. And it's not the end game, right? The end game is because, honestly, there isn't one application that doesn't have some sort of cache or doesn't have some sort of a log that they're going to store the data within that, right? Because they might not commit something if they use a database, or they might, however they're storing that or however they're doing that. They have to communicate and they have to utilize this, and they're everywhere. But, to be honest with you, there aren't a lot of forensic tools that are looking into logs at all, right? And there are a ton of them, and especially the access and the IP addresses and the places that these places are going and bouncing off aren't going to be stored within an application. I can promise you that, because it's transactional. It's transactional data that might be in there. It's being utilized, and the next time that's going to be, whoop, we're going to utilize or create a different log or a pin to that log. It's so, and again, that's, to be honest with you, that's probably the best, I guess, general artifact that anyone has brought to the show. I'm sorry if you guys who've seen this, because you know logs are my passion as well, because things write to
Yes.
them and they live in them, and there's so much stuff. I mean, Android logs, I can just go for days because it tells you so much about the things and the actions and the reset and all. Anyway, we can keep going, but I don't want to keep everyone in this, but we'll have to do it again, and I promise you to do that. But again, thank you, Devin. I mean, this was
Thank
phenomenal.
you.
It was, even though at the beginning I had my mic muted. Thank you guys. This is probably the most communication on the chat. I love seeing all of that stuff. You guys are actually talking. The community's together. They're helping people out on this. I love to see it. It is good because it's all about, obviously, each one of us helping each other out, because, hey, no one knows everything. I can promise you that. So,
Absolutely.
Evan, thank you so much.
We'll do it again.
I promise you, we will definitely do it again. Cool. All right. Honestly, I think that I think Devin, we were just thinking about you people that are watching this, because we could have kept going. We could have kept just talking, and I think that one of the things that you guys need to understand, which I think you get, it's all about community. It's all everyone helping everyone out. So make sure that you're looking at the blogs, you're jumping onto the About dfir. I mean, there's a lot of those that are out there, these types. But hey, reach out to someone. I mean, there's a lot of people, especially the social media that we have now. Reach out to someone, ask them a question, because nowadays with all the crazy stuff that's going on, I think that we should be helping. And get people into this the right way, not necessarily just, again, relying on something to do it for you. But next week, we will be back, and I am definitely looking forward to our guest next week. And I will see you guys then. Everyone have a great weekend. Thanks.